So you've been learning guitar for a little while now, and you feel that you're comfortable enough that you want to start to get your feet wet in the world of putting together your own guitar solos, but you don't even know where to start as far as doing that. So let's change that. Let's fix that today. Here we go. Good afternoon, howdy, hi, and how are you? Hope you guys are doing well. Welcome back. If you're new here, hi, I'm Miles. I'm glad you finally made it to the channel. What took you so long? On today's episode, we're going to be talking about guitar solos, what goes into them, what makes a good guitar solo, and how to get yourself up and running when it comes to constructing one of your own in the context of a blues chord progression or a rock chord progression. When it comes to formulating a guitar solo, at least early on, it can seem like a bit of a daunting task to undertake. And that's especially if you don't even know where to begin as far as what notes are the right ones to use, how to present those notes, and things of that nature. But my objective here today is to present you with some concepts that will hopefully make putting together a guitar solo a much easier task to undertake for you as a player, and will also give you a better understanding of the interactions of these notes in the context of the chords that you're playing over, and why they are complementary or not complementary to each other. Now, I also want to note that I'm not going to cover everything in this video today because it would make the video way too long. And what we're going to be talking about in regards to our examples in here is going to be in the context of a 12-bar blues. And this is information that isn't strictly only usable in a blues format. It can be used in all genres of music. But just for the simplest introduction to all this stuff, we're going to stick with a 12-bar blues. It's not mandatory that you know music theory in order to be able to put together a comprehensive guitar solo in any context, but it certainly does help to have an idea of what notes are going to be the most functional to use in any given format of music. And a good way of giving yourself a better context of what notes are available to you is to gain an understanding of your modes and your scales. Now, for the purposes of this video for today, I'm not going to go too deep into the topic of modes, but we are going to be discussing 3 of those modes in this video today, starting with the natural minor scale, otherwise known as the aeolian mode. Your natural minor scale is a 7-note diatonic scale that's outlining a minor key. For the purposes of today, we're going to be working within the context of the key of A. And the intervals that make up the natural minor scale consist of the root, major 2nd, minor 3rd, perfect 4th, perfect 5th, minor 6th, minor 7th, and then the octave. In the context of the key of A minor, the notes are A, B, C, D, E, F, G, cycling back to A. And in the context of a 12-bar blues, using the natural minor scale allows a lot of ground to be covered to have notes that are going to be complementary to play over the chords that make up the progression. Now, I also didn't mention what a 12-bar blues is, so I should do that. So what a 12-bar blues actually is, it's in reference to a chord progression that's taking place over 12 measures or bars of music. In the format of a blues progression, we're dealing with a 1-4-5 chord progression. So in this case, in the key of A, we're going to be dealing with the notes A, D, and E as our 1, 4, and 5. Those being the 1st, 4th, and 5th intervals of an A major or minor scale. And there's a bunch of different variations that you can have on the blues format, but overall, it's extending over 12 measures of music. So in this case, we're dealing with 4 measures of A, which is then followed by 2 measures of D, another 2 measures of A measure of E, a measure of D, a measure of A again, and then the turnaround takes place on a measure of 4 beats of E. And that's it. So that's your 12-bar blues format. So there you go. Back to the show. As far as other options available to you besides the natural minor scale, you can also utilize what's called the minor pentatonic scale. In this case, it's the same format as your natural minor scale. However, this time around, you're omitting your major second and your minor sixth intervals from the scale form. You don't have to look too far to find countless instances of this 5-note variation on your natural minor scale being utilized by guitar players. Perhaps because it offers a little bit more mobility with the limited number of notes and just the layout of the notes in the context of the fretboard on the guitar. But we'll talk more about that further down the road. Another popular option amongst guitarists is usage of what's called the hexatonic scale. In its minor form, the hexatonic scale consists of your regular natural minor scale minus the sixth interval of the scale. And it might seem a bit redundant to talk about the hexatonic scale in the same context as our natural minor scale and our pentatonic scale, but the minor hexatonic scale is not the only hexatonic scale that's available to us to use. In fact, there's another variation on the same concept that is very popular amongst guitar players, and that is the blues scale. Now, in the context of our blues scale, what we have is the same format as our minor pentatonic scale, with the addition of a chromatic note that exists between the fourth and fifth intervals. In the case of A minor, that additional note is going to be D sharp, or E flat. They're the same note. And the addition of this chromatic note to the scale offers what is referred to as a bluesy tonality, especially when you're going, in this case, from D to E. These scale forms are great to use in a sort of generic blues or rock format, but what most guitar players will make the mistake of doing is overusing these scales or using them in the wrong context. An example of this would be getting the nod from people that you're jamming with to take a solo, and you start ripping into your minor pentatonic scale with no sense of awareness that what you're actually playing over is a chord progression that's in a major key. And now everyone's looking at you like you're crazy, and not in a good way. So this is where we're going to want to add some more tools to our toolbox. First stop, the major scale, otherwise known as the Ionian mode. As far as its intervals, what we're dealing with is our root note to start, going to the major second, major third, fourth and fifth, major sixth, major seventh, up to our octave. In this case, it's going to be the notes A, B, C sharp, D, E, F sharp, G sharp, and then back to A. Now, in your typical blues format, the major scale, how it exists normally, is not going to have the same amount of mobility as your natural minor scale, or more so your pentatonic scale. But it can still be functional. It's also worth noting that with the major scale, there still is a blues scale that exists. It's just that now that chromatic note that's being utilized, rather than it being D sharp, it's going to be C, which is actually the note that exists as the minor third from our natural minor scale. It functions the same way here as D sharp functions when being added to the minor pentatonic scale. And there's also the major hexatonic scale. The layout this time around just being your major scale minus the seventh interval. Now, like I had said before, the major scale in all of its different contexts within the environment that we're working with today is going to have a lot less mobility in comparison to our natural minor and our minor pentatonic scales. But you can use notes from the major scale to resolve a melodic phrase in your solo, or you can use it to put together a series of notes in a quick burst that lead up to another interval that is shared between both the major and the minor scale. Something that's going to be neutral and that's not going to cause a clash as far as where it sits on top of the chords that you're playing over. playing in a major key, the major scale is going to have a lot more function and mobility in that environment. There's another modal form that works really well in this environment, and that is the mixolydian mode. Mixolydian mode is made up of the same intervals as your major scale, only now the 7th note in that scale is going to be brought down to the minor 7th, or it's going to be flatted. As far as modes are concerned, it's very functional in this environment. In fact, it works really well as a songwriting tool as well. If you think about songs like the song White Room from the band Cream, that's built around mixolydian mode. In fact, a lot of classic rock is built around mixolydian mode. But again, that's something for another video. And there's other modes and scales that you can utilize to your own effect, aside from what we've talked about here today, but I've found that these are a good starting point for most people to really kind of wrap their brains around what notes they can utilize in this sort of format. So now we've covered some scale and mode forms that we can use to put together the notes that make up our solo. But you don't want to be the type of guitarist that when they're jamming over a backing track or with other musicians, when it comes to their approach of a solo, is just running through scale forms, because to be honest, after a while it's going to become kind of boring and it's going to sound the same every time. So now let's talk about some ways that we could switch up this information and present it in a different manner. One good way of going about doing this is to take the melodic information that you have from these modes and these scales and present it with some variation to it rhythmically. So we're not changing the notes that we're playing, but we're changing how they're being presented as far as note durations. And doing this also serves as a good means of practice in terms of your modes and your scales, because you're going to get better at maneuvering through the scales, and you're going to have a better familiarity of where to access them along the length of the neck of the guitar. So the first thing that we want to establish is an understanding of how notes are divided up as far as the layout of any piece of sheet music and just music in general. So first, I just want to cover some of the terminology that's going to be getting thrown around at this point. One of the things that we're going to be talking about first is the term measure. Measures in music are basically like the period at the end of a sentence. So it's what keeps you from having a run-on sentence and kind of like dictates how much room you have for a musical phrase to a degree. Most commonly, when it comes to measures of music, what we have is the room to fit 4 quarter notes to a measure, otherwise known as 4/4 time in terms of time signatures. So when you look at sheet music and you see those 2 4s on the side, that's what they're in reference to. The bottom number being in reference to quarter notes, and the top number being in reference to how many can fit within that space. But it doesn't have to be just quarter notes. You can divide those notes up into other variations as well. And so a good way to get yourself sort of acclimated initially to utilizing these scales and modes in this context is to start with quarter notes. Nice and slow, get your grounding down, get yourself used to moving from one note to the next in a timely fashion. And from there, you switch those quarter notes to eighth notes. So if this is our quarter note, an eighth note is going to take up that same space, but with 2 notes. Feeling real comfortable, you move on from eighth notes to 16th notes. So if eighth notes are the equivalent of a quarter note divided by 2, a 16th note is the equivalent of a quarter note divided by 4. So this is our quarter note. These are our 16ths. Can't stress this enough, but take your time. Take your time. It's not a race. You'll get there. Just slow down. And once you feel like you have a handle on those note divisions, you can move on to trying to utilize what are called triplets. Triplets are unique in the sense that they take up the same space as a single note, but are being played as three individual notes. So, for example, if we're dealing with our same tempo as before, but instead of quarter notes, we're dealing with half notes. So 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Within that same space, we can fit 6 notes as 2 half-note triplet brackets. So that would be like triplet, 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 triplet. And there's different ways to count triplets, but I was always taught to just say the word triplet because you can split it up into 3 separate syllables. Triplet, triplet. And by utilizing triplets in the context of these scale forms and just your solo in general, it can offer some new unique motion to the changing of the notes that you're playing. So that covers how to change things up rhythmically. And now let's go back to how to change things around as far as the notes that we're playing. A good starting point is to take the information that you already have established and just move it to another position on the neck in a different octave. For those of you who may not know, an octave is a term used to represent the 8th note of the scale. The return back to the root note, but at a higher frequency. So if you're going through your major scale, this note here is the same as the note that we started with. And that's our octave. It's 8 steps away, hence the oct in the name. And octaves are all over the place, and if you have a good sense of where they are on the neck of the guitar, it makes it a lot easier to move your scale forms around and utilize this information in different positions. And playing through the elements that make up these modes and scales in different octaves can offer different emotive characteristics to the notes that you're playing. If you listen to guitar solos from guys like David Gilmour, Jimi Hendrix, Stevie Ray Vaughan, they're all notorious for playing all their rhythm parts down lower on the top part of the neck, and then when they go for their solo, it's up here in the higher register. But it's the same information. But by playing it at a higher frequency, the notes that they're playing stand out from the mix of everything else that's going on instrumentally in the song. And early on, I had found a way to go about playing through the blues scale that allowed me to switch through the octaves going from the higher register down to the open string. And that helped me in terms of outlining where everything sits on the neck of the guitar. And that was to go through, and then from here, my next octave of E, after I played E here, is on the 9th fret of G, which then leads to the 7th fret on A, and then open low E. In the key of A, we're just doing the same thing, but starting from A. Another option you can use in terms of variations to your solo is to take the notes that you have from your modes and your scales and change the order of them. And this is yet another good way of going about practicing any of your scales. For example, you can go through your major scale and you could play, rather than going through just in order, play it in thirds. So that means to go from the root note, bypass the second interval in the scale, and go straight to the third. And then repeat that process going from the second to the fourth, from the third to the fifth, and so on and so forth. This is good for getting your abilities as far as alternate picking up to speed, and it just gives you a better sense of how to navigate through the notes of the scale. This is also a great way of utilizing the minor pentatonic scale over 2 octaves, and it really shows the ease of maneuverability through the pentatonic scale in this context. Another technique that can be used to great effect in terms of changing how you're articulating the notes that you're playing in your solo is the usage of string bends. There's something uniquely different when it comes to bending up to a pitch versus just going and fretting that pitch on its own. Like this and have 2 different feels to them completely. And when being used in the context of a guitar solo, it can increase the sort of emotional characteristics of what you're playing. So, it's a good tool to have. And it's a technique that can be utilized in a singular format or with multiple strings. Whether it be a harmony between 2 strings or doing what's called a unison bend, where you're playing a single note here on one string and then you're bending up on another string to match that pitch. It doesn't have to be a perfect match, and you'll find that most guitarists, when they use this technique, aren't trying to make it a perfect match anyway, and are going to have some vibrato attached to the finger that's bending the string. A great example of this particular technique being used would be the Jimi Hendrix song Manic Depression. It goes through the verse, and then you have those bends. You could use more than 2 strings to do a sort of bend technique on the guitar, but don't get carried away, especially if you have a floating bridge on your guitar, because it gets to a point where you're changing the tension on the string so much that it's going to be hard to manage intonation of the notes that you're playing. And speaking of intonation, let's talk about that in regards to string bends. Some good practices to utilize early on when it comes to just getting yourself used to incorporating bending of strings into your playing is to first find a note that you're going for. So if you're going from here to there, rather than just like plugging away at the string, try to match that pitch. So you hear it, and you want to bend up to it and try to sustain it. And if you can do that, you're increasing your ability to identify individual notes just from hearing them, and you're going to make everyone around you so much happier. Because there's really nothing worse than being in the same room as a guitarist that thinks that they're being like super soulful, bendy guitarist, but they're hitting like every wrong note all the time. Another good practice when it comes to string bends is to utilize multiple fingers to increase your stability over the string that you're bending. So for example, let's say you're trying to do a bend from the 15th fret on the B string while also playing on the 15th fret of high E. It's going to be really hard to do that with just 2 strings and have it sound accurate pitch-wise. So what you can do is use your 3rd finger to play the actual note on the B string, but then use your 1st and 2nd fingers to help assist with pushing the string forward. So now the string is staying where it's supposed to. It's not going to jump out from under my finger because there's 2 other fingers there to help assist. And I can really have a good grasp on finding the pitch that I'm aiming for. Whether it be that or that or that. It's also worth noting when it comes to string bends in general, it's kind of a rule of thumb that when you're on the low E and A strings, you want to pull the strings inward on the fretboard, and when you're on high E and B, you want to push forward. When it comes to D and G, it kind of doesn't matter because there's enough surface area that if you push this string forward or you push it backward, it's not really going to make a big difference. But when it comes to these other strings, you don't want to run into the issue of having a string drop off the side of the neck. Unless you're trying to do a really authentic version of Kirk Hammett's solo in Master of Puppets. But again, that's for another video. So that covers a lot of stuff that you would need in terms of just getting started with soloing on the guitar. Hi there. Sorry to interrupt. Editor Miles here. I realized that for the entirety of the video, not once did I mention the option of utilizing the chords that exist in your chord structure as a means of representing a solo figure in your solo. What I mean by that is arpeggiating the chords that exist in your chord progression in a way so that you can use them in a different rhythmic fashion other than just strumming through them. So in this case, because we're dealing with a blues chord progression, it's not really major or minor, it's more dominant than anything else. In which case, the chords that you're spelling out are going to be A7, D7, and E7. And so you can take those chords and you can spell them out one note at a time. And so you can use those chords as a means of spelling out single note lines, but having a framework to it so that it's not so much based around just your scale figures. So that's another option you have for you. Just wanted to make sure that I mentioned that in this video. Okay, game on. Move it! But some important things to keep in mind when it comes to all this stuff is to remember that when you're playing a solo on the guitar, in any context, that your solo is essentially another melody or even another song within the song that you're playing on. And with that said, the most successful solos are ones that utilize a sense of melody and space. If you listen to guys like Jimi Hendrix, David Gilmour, John Mayer, Guthrie Govan, no matter what they're doing as far as the intricacies of what they're playing, there's still a sense of melody to everything that they're doing, and there's still a sense of almost like melodic statements being made, rather than it just being a slew of notes. Even if you listen to other instrumentalists beside guitar players, take Miles Davis for example, each solo that he takes is being phrased in a manner where it becomes more elaborate gradually. It's not starting out at like level 10, it's working its way up. And that's not just for him to kind of get a better grounding of what's going on musically around him, but it's also for the listener to really get acclimated to it as well. And that's what makes a solo more successful. If the listener's able to latch onto it and say like, okay, I'm ready for this ride, let's go, then they're going to be happily along the ride with you, rather than trying to figure out what's going on as you zoom past them at full speed. And you want your solo to stand out, but you also want it to be something that's complementary to the song, so that it's not standing out in a bad way. Over the years, I've had countless students come to me looking to improve on their abilities as far as their soloing is concerned. And so the first thing I tell them to do is to show me what they got. Play a solo for me. And they present me with a big bowl of what I like to call noodle soup. It's as if the objective is to play all the notes all at once as fast as possible. And there's no context to it, there's no direction, and it's almost like TV static in a way, but with more attack on the initial note. A lot more of this. And don't get me wrong, early on I was that guy. I was the one who was going to jam sessions and playing everything in minor pentatonic. It didn't matter what key we were in, it was just all day, every day. The worst. But then one day when I was attending school at SUNY Purchase, I had a professor that was listening to a track that I was putting together for one of my classes. And I had a solo in the song. And he asked me, "Can you hum that?" And I retorted just like, "No," thinking that he was crazy. And he said, "Exactly. If you have too much information being presented all at once, it's hard for any general listener to just latch onto it. So you want to build up to a point where things get really complex. You could put together music that's complex, but it's also capable of being digestible by the common person who's trying to consume your music. And when in doubt, try to think of your solos as something that's going to be presented for a singer to sing. Singers need to breathe. So you want to make sure that you're offering room in your musical phrasing so that there would be room for someone to breathe if they were trying to sing whatever solo you're putting together. Because obviously if your singer can't breathe, they're going to die. I mean, I hope not. I hope not. I hope they would just quit before that, but you get what I mean. But in short, when it comes to putting together your solos, remember to utilize variation in the notes and the rhythm of those notes that you're playing, space between those notes, and a sense of melody. You do those three things and you should be in good shape. And remember to be creative. I have too many students that come to me and they expect me to teach them how to write. And I could show you a number of things on how to write songs and how to construct a guitar solo like we did in this video, but it all means nothing if you don't have the creative spark to put it together in a way that you find is really resonating with you. So keep your mind open and experiment. Try new and different things. Don't be afraid to mess up, because you will. But you learn from your mistakes, and from there you improve and you continue to improve. And that's the objective in all of this. So make it happen. Alright, well, I hope you found this video and this whole intro course on getting started when it comes to soloing on the guitar to be helpful. Keep in mind that everything that we talked about today in regards to the approach to the guitar in the context of soloing in a blues format and even like in a classic rock sense as well, it doesn't stop there. This information can be utilized in other genres of music as well. It just happens to be useful to utilize the blues format for explaining and understanding this stuff and just getting up and rolling with utilizing it in your playing. And there's plenty of other variations as far as scales and modes that are available to you to utilize in your playing approach, but I've already been talking for what seems like forever, so we'll leave it at that for today. But if you like this sort of video where I'm doing a full-on lesson in regards to the guitar or music in general, please let me know in the comments below. I'll be sure to make more videos like these. And if you like what I'm doing here and you haven't already, be sure to hit that like button and also be sure to hit that subscribe button. It'll make these videos a lot easier for other people to see and just be able to spread the information around to a bigger audience of people. And if you would like to have access to the visual and the audio components associated with what we were talking about today in the video, I'll have that stuff available over on my Patreon. I'll leave a link for that down below, and you can check out the tiers of stuff that are available over there. And yeah, you'd be helping me out, so be sure to check it out. But with all that said, that's all I got for you for now. I thank you for your time, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video. Keep playing. Peace.